Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the quietest yet most haunting topics of the Middle Ages, mental health, and the price of not being allowed to have feelings. In this world, you weren't allowed to be sad for too long. You couldn't worry too deeply. And if you stayed silent too often, people would whisper that there was something wrong with you. But the scariest part wasn't the illness. It was how society had no space for silent suffering. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. I always love seeing who's joining this sleepy little journey worldwide. Now dim the lights, turn on a soft fan if you like that gentle background hum, and let's quietly drift into tonight's story. You wake up on a misty spring morning in medieval Europe. A rooster crows. Smoke rises from a cooking fire. Wooden clogs clack along the muddy road. But inside, something feels off. It's not hunger. It's not pain. It's a vague emptiness. Like you've lost something important but can't remember it. You're tired, restless, and don't want to get out of bed. Not out of laziness. You just can't find a reason to move. In modern times, someone might call this mild depression, anxiety. Just one of those blue days. But in this world, no one asks, "Are you okay?" Instead they say, "Too much black bile today, huh?" Yes. According to ancient medical theory, your body is a soup of four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Happiness means they're all in balance. But if you didn't want to plow the field this morning, that's black bile acting up. If you laugh too much yellow bile, shaky and anxious, phlegm outweighs blood. And the cure? Simple. Bleed it out. You enter the village healer's hut, hoping for rest, herbal tea, and maybe someone to talk to. A bowl is on the table within 5 minutes, knife in hand. The kindly old healer says, "Just a little blood." To release the sadness. You consider running, but she reassures you. "We cured the man next door. He used to see demons every night. Now, only on Thursdays." You're not sure that counts as an improvement. You decline the blade, so they switch tactics: herbal tea, calming, soothing, maybe even spiritual. Chamomile is the root of something, and a secret ingredient, which turns out to be dried, powdered chicken droppings. You drink it and feel different. Not better. It's more like dizzy, sweaty, and slightly poisoned. They pat your back and say kindly, "Good." If you vomit, it means the bad energy's leaving. You return home. Lie back on your straw bed, soaked in sweat. Still not better. A monk passing by sees your blank stare and says, "Careful. Full moon tonight. The weak of heart get possessed easily." You nod. You don't have the strength to argue, and in that quiet moment, it hits you. You're not allowed to be sad in this world. Sadness is weakness. Anxiety is a sign you've lost your faith. Exhaustion is a symptom of bad blood. You want to cry, but tears mean excess phlegm. If you laugh during pain, you're hysterical. If you sit quietly, you're either plotting treason or haunted by a demon living in your liver. So there it is. You can't be sad. Can't worry. I can't sit still. You can only be normal by the standards of a world that thinks mental health can be cured with leeches, root tea, and just enough prayer. And this is only the beginning. The next morning, you decide to return to the village healer. Partly because you still don't feel any better, and partly because if you stayed in bed any longer, your neighbors would start calling you the depressed slacker, a title with zero prestige in this period. People didn't say, "He's going through something." They simply said, "His black bile's acting up again." The healer's door is already open, as if your sadness had been anticipated. You barely have time to sit before someone brings out a clean ceramic bowl, a small knife, and a strip of cloth. The healer looks at you with concern, the kind that makes your spine tingle, and asks, "So, would you like the cut on your arm, your leg, or the back of your neck?" You mumble that you just want to talk. He shakes his head gently and waves it off. No need to talk. The humors never lie. Then he launches into the four senses of humor theory again, as if you were a cracked jug that needed a better balance of inner fluids to stop leaking sanity. Blood is hot and wet, the essence of life. Yellow bile is anger. Black bile is melancholy and silent. Phlegm represents sluggishness. And if you're too quiet, you may be overtaken by phlegm. You sit still, afraid that arguing would just get you diagnosed with excessive yellow bile. Eventually, he decides to make a small incision on your arm. Just a bit, he says, to let the bad blood out, along with the gloom. He assures you that plenty of people with mild madness improved after a few sessions of bloodletting. You're trembling, but you don't dare object. The knife slides across your skin. A thin red stream fills the bowl. You sit there staring at it, watching your sadness drip away drop by drop. Sadly, nothing changes. You're woozy, a little cold, and your arm hurts. The healer peers at the blood and nods. Dark color, long-standing grief. You should do this a few more times. You stumble out, your arm wrapped, face pale. On the way home, you stop 3 times to catch your breath. People glance your way. One whispers, "Did he steal something?" Another says, "Probably punished for not smiling properly." No one suspects a mental crisis. No one asks, "What's bothering you?" Because here, all emotions are adjusted with knives, blood, and the smell of crushed leaves. When you get home, the neighbor woman brings you a pouch of herbs. Inside, lavender, dried lotus petals, and a goat toenail. She tells you to boil it in rainwater and soak your hands, to rinse off residual sadness. You're unsure whether sadness can linger in your knuckle creases, but you do it anyway. The water reeks like a pharmacy exploded in a barn, but at least it's warm. And for a brief moment, as your fingers soak, you feel calm. Of course, your hands itch for 3 days afterwards. One afternoon, you go to the church, hoping God will understand. The priest listens patiently as you talk about your unexplained sadness, sleepless nights, and how you no longer care for almond tarts. He nods, then thoughtfully says, "Perhaps this is the Lord's test." You ask, "What is he testing me on?" The priest replies, "Your ability to endure your own uselessness." He then hands you a leather scroll, 3 pages long, with a prayer. Each time you feel sorrow, he says, recite this 3 times. The mental strain should be enough to suppress all grief. You try reading it, but halfway through page 2, you fall asleep. You're unsure if it was divine intervention or if your body just shut down from blood loss, itchy hands, and 4 days of watery gruel. In your dream, you're floating down a river of black bile. Cloaked figures ladle your blood into urns, whispering, "Excellent." The sorrow's leaving. When you wake up, you're not afraid anymore. Just tired. And you realize no one wants to know how you feel. They only want to know which fluid is misbehaving. And the only time anyone listens is when you're bleeding, or at least fainting from something foul you drank. That is mental health care in the Middle Ages. You grew accustomed to living with a nameless sadness, but the village wouldn't leave you alone. Seeing you still unhealed after the bloodletting, the rumors began. A woman passing by murmured, "Must be poisoning from the colon." A bushy-bearded man in the tavern declared, "That one needs to flush everything out before he sees again." And just like that, from someone simply going through depression, you were enrolled in the village's unofficial mental health program. Purging, enemas, and, if the gloom remained, tea with chicken poop. It all began on a sunny morning when the village herbalist knocked on your door, carrying a large jug and a rolled-up goatskin tube. She said bluntly, "Today I'm going to cleanse your insides." You looked at the tube, then at her, then at the back door, slightly ajar. Too late. She had stepped inside, Everyone had agreed. If the blood didn't fix you, it had to be your intestines. The cleansing began with a murky cup of hot liquid, peppermint, wild apple bark, and a pinch of something green she called the spirit of wilted grass. You drank it and felt as if your stomach was being twisted by an invisible hand. 15 minutes later, you bolted out of your house like a wet cat. No corner was secluded enough. No bushes thick enough. Flies, as if summoned by dark magic, arrived from every direction. You were gasping, crying, and somehow, even more miserable. By afternoon, just as you thought the worst had passed, the herbalist returned with another kettle. "Now for step 2, she said. "We flush from the bottom up." You protested weakly, but one glance at her firm face and the curious neighbors peering through your doorway told you that refusal might earn you the label possessed. And in your village's tradition, possession led to being drowned in a well or smoked out with incense. You were told to lie on your side, breathe deeply, and close your eyes. What followed cannot be described in terms suitable for children. Let's just say your dignity vanished in the first 5 minutes, and by the 10th, you questioned the concept of a soul. She muttered a quiet chant while patting your belly to help the airflow in harmony with the wind. That night, you sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket like a cocoon, staring into the distance. People thought you were reflecting on childhood memories. In reality, you just didn't dare move too fast. And in that despair, another woman, this time the cousin of the first herbalist, approached with the final remedy. A blackened bowl filled with steaming liquid that smelled like boiled cabbage, mixed with chicken coop. You didn't ask. You had no spirit left to ask. She touched your forehead and whispered, "Herbs steeped in chicken dung, a family secret. It purges the soul's shadows like peeling an onion." You stared at her. She nodded solemnly and gestured for you to drink. And you did, 1 sip. Enough to knock you backwards. Your mouth didn't just burn. It slimed. Your tongue folded in on itself like it wanted to die. You gagged, spat it out, and lay there as if your soul had quietly decided to move to another body. But strangely, after the coughing, retching, and that moment of, "I'll never trust anyone holding a bowl again," you felt empty. Not because the sadness was gone, but there was simply no room left in your mind for any feelings. Some villagers patted your back and said, "He looks less gloomy now." One whispered, "The chicken dung really works." You said nothing. You sat. You watched the sunset. And you breathed. Not in relief. Just because you still could. And in this era, sometimes, that's enough. You thought that after everything. The bloodletting, the gut purging, the enemas, and the herbal chicken poop tea. At the very least, people would finally believe that something was genuinely wrong with you. But no. When you continued to stare into the distance, refused to touch your watery porridge, and responded to kind greetings with a slow, solemn nod, the villagers didn't see this as proof of your suffering. They looked up at the sky, not to pray, but to find a new cause. The moon. And so, a new theory took root. Maybe you had gone mad from the moon. An old woman with a face wrinkled like a soaked rice cracker leaned in and whispered, "Dear, the moon was full last night. Even the chickens pecked each other. Imagine what it does to people." She sighed like someone who had witnessed dozens of lunacy cases caused by moonlight. And she wasn't alone. That afternoon alone, 3 more people came knocking at your door, each armed with a theory. A long-bearded man claimed, "When the moon is full, the human brain swells with light. Emotions spill over like soup from an overfilled bowl." Another, a self-proclaimed village doctor, drew a circle of ash on your doorstep and declared, "The moon is driving bad energy from the ground up. If you're sad, you've absorbed too much." You sat in your house, watching moonlight filter through the window and reflect on the rough stone wall. It should have been a peaceful moment. Instead, you felt like you were about to be tied to a post. Because the villagers didn't just believe the moon was to blame. They thought it needed to be appeased. And how did they appease it? By keeping you silent under the moon for as long as possible. One evening, while you were trying to sleep, two men knocked gently and said with suspicious politeness, "We'll take you to the fields. The night air's good for you." You were too tired to resist, so you followed quietly. They led you to a clearing where a small post had been planted and wrapped with strips of silver-dyed cloth. You were told to sit beneath it. No speaking, no moving, just gaze at the moon. One handed you a cup of cold water and said, "If the moon starts spinning like a wheel, that means healing has begun." You drank, you sat, and nothing spun, except the flies. A cow wandered by and gave you a look of pity. The wind swept across the field, carrying the giggles of children who had snuck out to watch you reconcile with the moon. You wanted to scream, "I'm not moon-cursed. I'm just sad." But then you remembered. Screaming under the full moon might make them think you were possessed. And for the villagers, that was the last step before, well, setting someone on fire. The next morning, you were released from the post. An old woman handed you a handful of sticky rice and whispered, "Eat this. It'll keep your soul in place after moon exposure." You took it, not knowing whether to eat or cry first. Back at home, sitting alone, you realized something. Ever since your emotions started to unravel, people have tried to pin the blame on everything, from bile to bowels to now, the position of the moon. And you wondered, has even one person ever stopped to ask, "What's been bothering you?" Number. They only asked, "Was the moon too bright last night?" Or, "Are your bowels moving regularly?" Or, "Did your soul wander out at midnight?" And that was the most exhausting part. Not the bizarre potions, vinegar rituals, or stares of curious children, but the loneliness. You lived in a world where every internal pain was blamed on fluids, light, wind, or spirits. No one listened. They only diagnosed. They didn't see you as a person, just a leaking bag of humor. And you, someone who just needed to be acknowledged as not okay, had become a topic of gossip, a communal healing project, and sometimes moonlit entertainment. That night, lying on your straw bed, you stared at the full moon rising through the hole in your thatched roof. It was truly round, truly bright. But you didn't feel crazy. You just felt sad. A very human sadness. Not from the moon. Not from bile. Not from your intestines. Just from being you. After several nights of moonlight meditation that yielded no mental clarity beyond two swollen, mosquito-bitten eyelids, you began to think. Surely you'd now exhausted every folk remedy the village had to offer. You were wrong. So wrong. Because two powerful forces had yet to intervene. The astrologer-physician and the clergy. One morning, as you were trying to convince yourself not to cry into your cold porridge, an auntie barged in, pointed to the door and said, "The doctor's here." You looked up, hoping to see someone who understood that sadness isn't always a bowel issue. But no, it was a man in a dark robe, with a leather satchel over one shoulder and a star chart in hand. Not a stethoscope, not a thermometer, just a vellum map of the planet's positions at your time of birth, inked in faded brown. He sat across you, studying your face like a rare weather pattern. Then he began asking for your birth date, birth time, birthplace, even the name of the cow your family used to own. After scribbling, he clicked his tongue and declared, "Ah, your moon sits in the 8th house. Saturn is in retrograde. And Mars is jealous." You blinked. Jealous? Of whom? Of you. Why? He continued. "Your sadness makes sense. The cosmos is suppressing your energy. Avoid water, onions, and especially don't sleep under a thatched roof during half moons." You wanted to explain that your only roof was thatched, and you couldn't afford to avoid onions or water. But he was already jotting this wisdom onto a scroll, handing it to you solemnly like a prophet passing off destiny, then vanished. You collapsed onto your straw mat, staring at the ceiling, your mind echoing with strange fragments. Jealous Mars, avoid onions, half-moon doom. It all sounded like symbolic poetry, except it was meant to fix your depression. And before you could unravel it all, another man arrived that afternoon, a priest, with a wrinkled forehead like folded bread and a Bible clutched tightly in both hands. He didn't ask questions. I just sat beside you and began reciting scripture in a holy and vaguely menacing voice. You sat upright. Some verses were about demons, others warned that mental confusion was the fruit of unconfessed sin. Then suddenly he turned and locked eyes with you. Have you committed any sins you've yet to confess? You stammered. You weren't sure. Maybe stealing a pear, skipping Sunday prayers, and recently yelling at a cat that scratched your foot. But before you could say anything, he nodded solemnly. Then it's clear. The devil has found its way into your soul through the doorway of laziness and lack of repentance. Without warning, he scattered salt around your bed, placed a bowl of holy water at your feet, lit incense, and began an exorcism. You froze, a straw figurine in human form, too afraid to move. He chanted, then whispered, then shouted, then whispered again, then screamed, "Come out, you fallen spirit." You wanted to say, "There's nothing in me except sadness and cold porridge." But you stayed silent, because saying anything might make him think. The demon was talking back. The exorcism lasted a full hour. Afterwards, he instructed you to fast for 3 days, avoid all cats, never gaze at the moon, and, very specifically, not sing at dusk. When you said, "But I've never sung at dusk," he replied, "Good. Don't start." He left you with a holy candle, a wooden medallion of St. George stabbing a dragon, and a note pinned to your door that read, "Pray for the soul under trial within this house." Passers-by slowed to gawk like you were harboring some spiritual virus. Children were told not to come near. A neighbor started taking a long way around your home. Even a once friendly dog began barking. Not because you'd changed, but because everyone said you had. That night, lying on your straw bed, you stared at the candle dripping wax into a silent puddle. You wondered, does anyone know how I feel? Everyone who'd come brought a new theory. Your guts, the moon, the planets. Now demons. But no one, not a single soul, ever asked, "Do you need a hug?" You rolled over, hugging your rough straw blanket. A tear slipped out. Maybe from emotion. Maybe from the salt still scattered in your sheets. And you whispered, "It's not a demon. I'm just sad." After a week of being labeled the temporary lodging of a demon, you notice something strange. The whispers behind your back are no longer questions. They are declarations. No one asks if you're tired. No one wonders how much you've been sleeping, whether you're eating well, or if you've been feeling sad more often than usual. All you hear now are things like, "He's just lazy. Look at those eyes. Probably sleeps all day. He doesn't want to do anything. Completely hopeless." And you can't even explain to them that you're not lazy. You're just exhausted. You don't sleep in because of sloth. You sleep in because every morning feels like a storm crashing through your mind. And you have no roof to hide under. But mental exhaustion wasn't seen as an illness in the Middle Ages. It was seen as a failure. It was evidence of a weak spirit, a lack of faith, or, most commonly, laziness. So you try. You try to be diligent, so they'll stop talking. You wake up earlier, even when your eyelids feel glued shut. You drag yourself to the fields, hoe in hand, digging into the earth. You collapse more than once, but keep forcing yourself upright. An old man passing by nods approvingly. "There we go. That's a proper man." An old woman adds, "Good." The demons left him. But if you sit down for more than 5 minutes, someone will whisper, "Ah, it's coming back again." You slowly realize, if you don't work, you're lazy. If you work but look sad, you're faking it. If you work too much, you're hiding something. probably guilt. No matter what you do, your depression is always misunderstood as your attitude. And as for anxiety, that's a whole different story. People don't think you're anxious because of stress or insecurity. They think you're trembling because some devil is whispering in your ear. One day your hand shakes while holding a spoon. Someone sees it and mutters, "The spirit's talking to him again." That tremble's not from cold, it's from a rebellious soul. You want to say it's because you're hungry, and your hands are weak after 3 days of turnip water porridge. But no one listens. Anxiety to them is just the visible sign of your guilty conscience. And if you can't even remember what you did wrong, that just proves you're too far gone to even recall your sins. So, instead of getting help, you get led, once again, to the church. The priest places a hand on your forehead and says, "There's something restless in you, something circling in the shadows. You cannot sleep. That's because the darkness knows of your guilt." You want to say, "I can't sleep because the neighbor's roosters scream at 3 a.m., but you know better. Whatever you say will be twisted into a confession. And if you deny too strongly, they'll take it as a sign that you're hiding something darker. So you stay silent, which of course is suspicious. Someone says, "He's awfully quiet." Another nods. The loud ones are easy to spot, but the dangerous ones, they keep it inside. You start to laugh softly, not because anything's funny, but because you're exhausted beyond words. And even that is wrong. Someone gasps, "See? He's laughing, even now. How shameless." An old woman clasps her hands, eyes to the sky. "Lord, guide this soul back to righteousness." And it hits you. You cannot win. Sad, anxious, quiet, or smiling. Every reaction you have can and will be interpreted as proof your soul is broken. So you stop trying. You nod when someone hands you a potato. You quietly step back when someone sprinkles holy water on your door. And you accept the stares from the entire village like an extra coat you'll never take off. You lie in the dark that night, not even bothering to light a candle. Outside, the wind rustles the hay walls. And in that silence, you realize, in this era, people don't treat emotional pain. They punish it. They don't listen to your feelings. They dig through your past, looking for sin. They don't believe you can be sad without deserving it. And in the quiet, you whisper a single wish. That maybe, centuries from now, someone will understand. That a person who's tired, silent, or scared might not be cursed. I might not be guilty. I might just need a hug. No bloodletting. No stargazing. No soul-purifying goat-foot tease. Just someone who says, "I believe you're doing the best you can." The Middle Ages had a curious trait. People didn't distinguish between psychology and morality. In other words, if you laughed too much, no one thought you might be manic. Or maybe you just remembered something funny. Number. They assumed you were hiding a terrible secret. Because at that time, excessive joy was seen as suspicious. One fine morning, you chuckled during breakfast at a neighbor's house. Nothing serious, just a cat chasing its own shadow, accidentally diving into the porridge pot, then yowling like it had been personally insulted. But you laughed, a bit too loudly. People looked at you. Someone whispered, "He laughed during a meal." That's odd. Another frowned. "No one laughs while eating thin gruel. He must know something we don't." You freeze. A giggle has just evaporated from your lips and transformed into evidence against you. Because, according to their worldview, the righteous were silent. The ones who laughed too much were either fools or liars. You try to adjust. In the days that follow, you keep a straight face, even when your brain has absurd thoughts like, "If I wrapped straw around my head and pretended to be a bird's nest, would anyone come near me?" But you hold it in. You teach yourself to look down, speak less, and never, ever, smile to yourself. But one day, you just can't help it. A child runs past in clothes so patchy they look like a walking potato sack, then gets pecked on the butt by a goose and tumbles into the mud. You snort, just a tiny giggle. and the child's mother turns to glare at you like her eyes could pierce stone. You get labeled as someone who takes joy in the suffering of others. You try to explain, "I just thought the goose was funny." But she cuts in, "Only a scoundrel laughs at misfortune." So you retreat again. But you can't control your face forever. One evening, after a rat steals the last bit of your supper, you let out a bitter smile. Someone sees it. They nod solemnly. He's smiling after losing food. He must be planning something. From then on, you're unofficially placed on the village's suspicious moral character list. It's not written down anywhere, but word spreads fast. Children are told to avoid you, not because you're dangerous, but because his smile is in the wrong place. And in this time, an out-of-place smile is more terrifying than a scream. You begin to fear your face. You don't know when your lips might curl upwards on reflex. Every expression feels like a strategic decision, and that exhausts you. Because you're no longer someone who laughs, you're someone performing righteousness. One night, you catch your reflection in a puddle. Your face is so serious that you barely recognize yourself. That's not the dreamer you once were. Not the person who used to chat with chickens or hum softly while carrying buckets. It's a version of you that's been sanded down, censored, and revised to fit a moral template carved centuries before you were born. You lie down on the old straw bedding, wondering, how many others like you are sitting quietly, afraid to laugh or cry, fearing being judged? How many sorrows have been buried under polite nods? How many anxious hearts have been mistaken for bad manners? You don't know. But you know one thing. In this world, if you're sad, it's your fault. If you're anxious, you're doing something wrong. And if you laugh at the wrong time, you just might be a sign of moral decay. You sigh, slowly, eyes closed. And even that sigh, if someone overheard, might be taken as the breath of a man, plotting something unholy. You don't remember exactly what led to that therapy session. Maybe it was because you sat silently by the well for too long. Perhaps it was that one night you wandered off and got caught talking to the cat. Though in reality, you were just mumbling to yourself. The cat just happened to be there. Or maybe it was, as the village choir leader put it, that your gaze was simply too distant for comfort. Whatever the reason, the conclusion was the same. You were possessed. Not by the dramatic, roaring demons of modern movies. No, this was the quiet, cunning, and insidious type of demon. In other words, you didn't need to scream. You just needed to be depressed long enough for people to get suspicious. So one morning, while you were eating your usual cold porridge in your usual dull mood, a group walked into your house. They didn't knock. They just came in with the solemn energy of people about to evict an ancient spirit from a pile of straw. At the front was the priest, the same one who once sprinkled salt around your bed. Behind him were two burly young men and a frail older woman carrying a water bowl. You asked what was going on. They didn't answer. They began to prepare the ritual. The older woman tossed salt around you, this time more than before. It looked like winter had arrived in salt form. The two men held your shoulders while the priest began muttering, waving a bundle of herbs that smoked like a mixture of basil, burning hay, and mild paranoia. You tried to explain, "I'm just sad. I'm not hearing voices or anything." But the priest didn't stop. He shouted, "Silence! The demon is speaking through him." You flinched. It was the first time someone screamed in your face, and you couldn't argue back. Resisting would only confirm that you were thrashing in the rebellion of evil. The priest flung water at your face, cold as death, pungent like raw fish sauce and table salt. You choked. A stream went up your nose. You started coughing violently. They clapped and cheered. "It's reacting." The demon has been revealed. Someone brought in a bundle of burning leaves, not to waft gently around you, but to shove directly up your nose. You coughed like a rat being smoked out of a hole. They saw it as evidence of purification. Then came bells, someone chanting Latin repeatedly, and another round of head dunking in the saltwater bowl. Somewhere between gasping and drowning, you wondered, do demons get this exhausted too? The exorcism ended when you lightly passed out. When you come to, everyone is eating pastries. The priest wiped the sweat from his brow and announced, "He'll recover. We have expelled a wayward spirit and welcomed back one capable of repentance." An older woman pressed half a boiled yam into your hand. "Keep it close," she whispered, "in case the demon returns." You said nothing. No thanks, no protest. You chewed the yam like it was a survival instinct. Your mind wasn't filled with demons or fear anymore. Just one solid truth. You had just experienced a deeply spiritualized form of a nervous breakdown. That evening, you were instructed to light a candle, not for prayer, but to keep the evil from coming back. They told you to sleep with the candle burning all night, placed over a bowl of salt water, and under no circumstances should you snore. Because if you snored, they might think the demon is whispering during your dreams. You nodded. You weren't sure you had the right to refuse anymore. You just wanted peace, even if that peace had to be purchased with salt, smoke, and surprise baptisms. That night, you lay curled up, hair crusted with salt, eyes watching the candle flicker. And you realize that in this age, sadness is never allowed to be sadness. It must be blamed on something supernatural. It must be exorcised. It must be screamed at, drowned, and smoked out. And you, someone who is just sad, someone who just wants quiet, someone who just needs a dreamless night, you must continue pretending to be healed through faith. You sighed and whispered, what demon lives in me? Or am I just a tired person trying to survive an age that has no place for the human heart? In the Middle Ages, things were especially complicated if you were a woman. Much more complicated. Back then, women weren't just seen as physically weaker. They were considered mobile containers of unstable emotions, where every single mood swing was blamed on one thing: the womb. Yes, you heard that right. If you were sad, irritable, sleepless, sighed too much, or even just stared out the window for a bit too long, chances were someone would whisper, "Her womb is wandering." And no, that wasn't a metaphor. They believed the womb was an organ capable of detaching and going on adventures. Like a naughty child getting lost in the forest, the womb would wander up to the chest, press on the heart, choke the throat, slide back down into the belly to chill things out, and sometimes jab the liver to trigger unexplained rage. So instead of being asked, "Are you all right?" you'd be asked, "Has your womb been behaving lately?" Seriously. A woman in your village, Beatrix, once complained of crying at night, insomnia, and feeling hollow inside. The village's response? An old midwife nodded gravely and said, "Her womb must have climbed too close to the heart." So they made her lie on her back, legs elevated, head lowered, for 3 days straight, hoping gravity would guide her womb back to its rightful place. But that wasn't all. They used herbal smoke to lure the womb home. They burned roots, cinnamon bark, garlic, and onions under her belly while muttering prayers. The smoke rose thick and pungent. Beatrix coughed so hard she nearly fainted, but the crowd cheered. "See, she's reacting. The womb feels guilty." And if a woman didn't marry young, her sadness was blamed on a much simpler explanation. A hungry womb. Not hungry for food, hungry for purpose. They believed the womb existed to bear children. So if you weren't married, pregnant, or fulfilling your function, it would revolt. And this rebellion, they said, was the root of depression, anxiety, and sometimes heresy. A young girl once sat alone by the well, admiring the flowers. Someone noticed her melancholy and said, "That girl needs to be married immediately, or the womb will start whispering to her in the voice of demons." The next day, she was engaged to the town butcher, 30 years older, very loud. She cried, and they said, "See, her womb is trembling with sudden joy." If a woman felt restless, worried, or angry, no one asked about stress, fears, or personal struggles. They soaked her feet in scented water, placed a sachet on her belly, and sometimes played flute music around her waist to guide the womb home. Not a joke. They did this. And if you think the flute was the worst of it, wait until you hear about scent therapy. An old remedy advised placing fragrant herbs near the genitals and something pungent near the mouth, so the womb would be drawn downward, away from the brain. Yes, they were trying to steer the womb like a confused donkey using scent signals. You wouldn't know whether to laugh or cry. But if you laughed too much, they'd say the womb had jabbed your heart. If you cried, it was cold womb vapors rising to the eyes. Every emotion was blamed on this one organ, which never actually left its spot, but still got blamed for all your internal experiences. And if you were a mother, already had children, but still felt sad, still anxious, still saw life as a bland, saltless porridge, no one would ask about postpartum stress, sleepless nights, or whether your husband yelled too much. They'd say, "Maybe her womb didn't settle back into place after birth. We'll need to hang her upside down for a bit." You'd watch these women forbidden to feel anything unless it came with a medically approved womb reason, and realize, at this time, emotions weren't seen as part of the soul. They were mechanical malfunctions. And women? They were vessels. Shake them slightly and something inside might go rogue. That night, you'd lie on your straw bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking, if you were a woman, maybe you wouldn't even dare to frown, because a frown might be interpreted as a womb in protest. You'd sigh, thinking, I wonder when people will finally understand. Not everything inside the body needs to be pulled, smoked, or serenaded with a flute. If you were a woman in the Middle Ages and happened to wear a contemplative expression, sat quietly, or, heaven forbid, didn't smile at the right moment, no one would take you to a physician. They wouldn't call a priest. They wouldn't even bother with herbal tea. Number. They'd look at you with the deepest pity and whisper among themselves, "She just needs a husband." It didn't matter how old you were, what you thought, or whether you wanted to love anyone. The village matchmaking protocol kicked into gear when you looked remotely sad. One day, you're sitting at your doorstep, knitting wool, lost in a half-forgotten dream, when the village midwife strolls by. She glances at you knowingly and declares, "Marry her off. One good cart puller, and she'll be cured." You're unsure how she got there, logically speaking. But she adds, "The womb needs direction. It needs a man to show the way." You nearly choke on your cold herbal tea, not because of the flavor, but because her sentence just body-slammed your logic and emotions simultaneously. Worse still, everyone agreed with her. In the following days, potential suitors materialize out of nowhere. Someone drops off pastries. Another brings you a cabbage. A bashful young man nods at you by the village well, promptly drops his bucket into it, and runs off red-faced. You're baffled, until a village aunt leans in and whispers, "I told him to marry you. It's good for both of you. You'll stop being sad, and he won't have to travel to find a wife." You want to say you're not sad because you lack a life partner. You're sad because your mind is exhausted. But if you say that, they'll nod and mutter, "See? Still talking nonsense. Her womb must still be out of alignment." And if you refuse to marry? Don't worry. They have a backup plan. Get you pregnant. Not through anything modern or consensual, of course, but through prayer. They believed if a woman was sad too long, couldn't sleep, or said things like, "Life feels meaningless," it meant one thing: a starving womb. And a hungry womb was a medical emergency. So instead of talking to you, comforting you, or letting you rest, they'd march you to the chapel and pray for you to conceive. One afternoon, you're halfway through a turnip, when you get dragged into a fertility restoration ritual. The priest places his hand on your forehead. The midwife grips your wrist tightly. Together, they chant, summoning joy through the sheer force of spiritual ovulation. You sit there, face blank as the vegetable in your hand, unsure if you're supposed to feel blessed, ashamed, or just hilariously confused. Afterwards, they all look at you, waiting for a miraculous transformation. When you remain just as sad, no one seems discouraged. They simply say, maybe she needs more prayer. We'll try again next week. There was another girl in your village, Isolde, maybe 20 years old. She liked to daydream, talk to birds, and sometimes giggle. They diagnosed her with spiritual emptiness, a polite way of avoiding the word loneliness. Their cure? They married her off to a basket weaver twice her size, with a thunderous voice and a passion for showing off his muscles by snapping twigs in half. 1 month later, Isolde no longer spoke to birds, but she didn't smile either. They nodded in approval. See? Silence means stability. But Isolde had started wearing a veil. She walked slower. She never looked anyone in the eye. And to them, that meant she was healed. You start to understand. They don't need you to be happy. They just need you to be silent, married, and pregnant. And if you still feel sad afterwards, they'll say the fetus hasn't yet anchored to the soul. You imagine a world where someone says, she needs a bit of meditation, some honest conversation, and time to rest. But no. Here, they say, she needs a man, so her womb can get back to work. That night you sit alone under a crescent moon, holding a cup of cold tea, thinking about the one simple truth no one seems to acknowledge. Maybe you're sad, because life is exhausting, not because you haven't married, not because you lack a fetus, just because you're you. And you whisper to yourself, I don't need a husband. I need a deep sleep, a gentle hug, and someone who won't try to fix me with cabbage, incense, or marriage. After all the cured by marriage therapies failed, they decided to try a new approach, isolating you for quiet reflection on your sins. You're not sure what you did wrong, other than not pretending to be fine when you weren't. But unexplained sadness was a sin by medieval standards, a serious one. It is likely rooted in envy, laziness, or loving yourself just enough for demons to slip through. So one morning, just as you're folding straw into a pillow, 2 men arrive holding a weathered piece of parchment. They speak plainly. You must be removed from society to purify your thoughts. You blink, thinking this might be a retreat. It is not. Purify means being locked alone in a small hut, without windows, without a bed, and with nothing but dry bread, cold water, and yourself. They escort you to a shack at the edge of the village, once used for storing firewood or sick chickens, now cleansed with holy water and renamed the Room of Repentance. You step in. The air feels colder, as if your melancholy had soaked into the clay walls before arrival. They hand you a handwritten book of scripture and instruct you to read at least 30 pages daily. You need the word of God, not conversation, they say. Sadness isn't in the heart. It's in the untamed greed of the soul. You want to argue, to say you don't crave anything but someone who'll listen. But you know that would only earn you more days in the room. Food is left outside once a day. Black bread as tough as a fence post, and water served in a hollowed-out gourd. You don't need much. Hunger opens the ears of the soul, they say. You take a bite. It tastes like biting a boot, but at least it's something to chew, and chewing is one of your last pleasures. On the first day, you try reading. The first page is peaceful enough. By page 2, the metaphors tangle. By page 10, you're nodding off halfway through the sentence. Lead astray souls back into the light. Just as your mind whispers, yes. But who leads those who are simply sad? You sit there for 3 days, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks, watching sunlight sneak through a slit in the clay wall. At night, the cold forces you to wrap straws around your feet. By day, that crack in the wall becomes your only window to the world, the one thread connecting you to humanity. No one visits. They believe solitude is the cure. They think if you spend enough time facing yourself, you'll awaken, discover your flaws, and emerge radiant, like a spring cabbage after rain. But the truth is that sadness doesn't dissolve in silence. It just gets quieter. It sticks to your ribs. It settles in your stomach. And sadness begins to speak to you when you can't talk to anyone. What am I doing here, you wonder? Did I really sin? Or am I just living in the wrong century? On the fourth day, they open the door, squinting at you like an owl they've woken too early. You smile faintly, not from joy, but because, finally, there are people. They nod. Good. She has learned humility. Then they ask if you saw anything. A sign? A revelation? A spiritual breakthrough? You reply, I saw a spider. They ask, what did it say to you? You pause. Nothing. It was laying eggs. You're permitted to return to the village, on the condition that you continue fasting. Simple food keeps the spirit light, they say. You start to feel like a clay pot into which they're pouring every theory. Ancient medicine, rustic theology, whatever they can try next to make you less odd. But strangely, even after being locked up, hungry, and alone, you don't rebel. You just grow quieter. And in this world, that's a good sign, because silence means obedience, and obedience, to them, means healing. You walk back through the village. People greet you not with smiles but with measuring glances. Someone whispers, she's repented. Another murmurs, see? A few days locked up and she's fine. You don't know whether to laugh or cry. You're not repentant. You're just drained. And in that exhaustion, you're more accepted than ever. The world doesn't need you to be well. It just needs you to be quiet. If anyone has ever told you that all you need is time alone to recover, it's probably because they've never been locked in a stone room with no windows, no bed, no one to talk to, and nothing but a piece of bread as hard as betrayal and a bucket of water as cold as trust after a lie. You thought the last experience was the peak of isolation. But no, this time, the village decides you need a long-term seclusion. Not for repentance, but for forgetting. One foggy morning, you're woken by a dry knock and a flat voice. You're not quite normal yet. I fear we need the final measure. You don't ask anything. You know better now. Asking only confirms the suspicion. Even your quiet weariness is being interpreted as proof of incomplete recovery. So they take you to the reflection cell, a name that sounds like a spiritual retreat but is, in reality, a damp stone pit next to an abandoned storage shed. The door is thick oak, with a small slit, just enough to slide in food or for someone to look in and check if you're still behaving. You're asked to hand over everything, any tied clothing, your comb, books, even your spoon, because here, they worry you might use those things to think the wrong thoughts. What's inside? A moldy straw mat, an empty wooden bowl, and one wall scratched with old fingernail marks from, as they put it, a previous guest. You sit in silence. There's nothing to do, no one to hear, nothing to say. The only sounds are the skittering of mice in the rafters and the creak of the water bucket when the wind slips through the cracks. On day 1, you count time by the light filtering in through the slit. By day 2, you're unsure what's morning and night. By day 3, you start talking to a patch of moss on the wall. You name it Elric. Elric doesn't talk back. But at least Elric doesn't interrupt. Each day the guard slides in a piece of bread, the kind that could cause head trauma if thrown, and a jug of cold water. He never speaks. He looks at you like a mushroom coaxed out of the soil after a drought. On day 5, you knock gently on the wall. No reply. But 10 minutes later, the guard opens the slit and murmurs, "No knocking." Noise signals agitation. You nod. And in that moment, you realize that nodding is the only gesture left to prove you're still human. You begin to miss a sound, voices, even roosters, even arguments at the village market. You start longing for a dumb question, a bored sigh, a trivial complaint. But all you hear are your thoughts, far from kind. You think of things you used to dream about. A decent meal, a friend to talk to, a night of dreamless sleep. Now, your only dream is simpler, to hear a real voice again. Then, one day, the guard says, "You could be released early, if you show signs of stability." Your voice, hoarse, asks, "What does stable mean?" He shrugs, no longer strange. You go quiet. Because you know, strange or not, it's not your call. So you start sitting straighter. You finish your bread. You smile faintly when handing back your bowl. You stop doing anything unusual, even though inside, the unusualness has already rooted in you, like damp fungus, invisible but clinging to every thought. A week later, they open the door. Sunlight stabs your eyes. The guard throws a cloth over your head, leading you out like someone escorting a fragile artifact that might explode. You return to the village. No one claps. No one asks how you are. One person whispers, "Looks normal now." Another shrug. "Yeah, better than before." Didn't have that strange look. You want to say, "I just wanted someone to ask if I was okay." But instead you say the only sentence guaranteed to be accepted. "Thank you for helping me come back." Even though, in your mind, the sentence is still unfinished. Come back to society, but further away from myself. After your so-called recovery and return to the village, you live as carefully as a thin clay pot. You don't laugh too loudly, don't stare too long into space, and never take more than half a second to answer a simple question. You know that even if you're now considered back to normal, you're still walking in the gray zone, where a single mistimed sigh can get you flagged all over again. But then, you start to notice something strange. Some villagers who once disappeared were never spoken of again. No one remembers exactly where they went. When asked, the answer is always vague. They were taken away. Taken where? One day, you ask an older woman who is gathering firewood. She doesn't answer immediately. He glances at the old church on the hill and mutters, "If it's mild, they stay. If it's serious, they go up there." Go up there? You don't wait long to find out. While helping gather firewood with a group of children one afternoon, you hear a commotion from the village center. A man is shouting, not in pain, but in conversation with someone who isn't there. A man in his 40s, shirt askew, hands stained with dirt, stands in the square as if conducting an invisible orchestra. The crowd gathers. No one laughs. No one intervenes. They just watch, as if waiting for something routine to unfold, the final confirmation. Then a priest approaches, calmly. He places a hand on the man's shoulder and quietly says, "You require a deeper cleansing." The man doesn't resist. Maybe he's heard the phrase too many times before. Two young men arrive and escort him away. No rope, no shouting. Just silence. And the twilight field swallows them whole. And you understand. This is a one-way trip. Those deemed too mad are sent to the monastery, not for healing, but for storage. These places are isolated, surrounded by high stone walls and small vegetable gardens. From the outside, they appear sacred. From the inside, they are zones of permanent silence. There, no one asks how you feel. They teach you scripture, encourage silence, serve small meals, and above all, discourage bothering others. You hear the story of a woman named Agnes, once the best baker in the region. One day she began talking to the fire in her oven. Then she started writing strange poems, mixing flour with ash to create soul-release pastries. They said she'd been possessed by the baking demon. She was sent to the mountain monastery, where her world became a single room, a watching priest, and a holy book as heavy as a brick, to align her mind with the weight of God's word. No one saw her again, but her bread is still remembered whenever winter comes. Agnes's bread once warmed the whole village, an elder says. But then, she wasn't well, and we had to keep her safe. It sounds kind, but you know, keeping her safe meant keeping the village comfortable. For others, there's not even a monastery. If you're not docile enough to stay in the village but not calm enough to fit into a holy order, the answer is even simpler. Permanent confinement. Some are locked in their own homes, windows sealed, doors barred from the outside, food passed through a slit in the wall. One such man lives just a few fences down from you. He was once a skilled wagon maker. Then one day he started humming endlessly. It's not a song, just a single odd tune looping for hours. People panicked. Someone said, if he keeps humming like that, the crops will rot. And so he was locked away. No trial, no farewell, just gone. Sometimes when you pass his old house, you think you hear the faintest whistle through the wood. But no one stops, no one acknowledges it, because some silences are carefully curated. And you realize, in this era, if you don't fit the spiritual mold, if you laugh at the wrong time, cry when no one else does, or hear things no one else hears, you are not seen as someone who needs help. You are seen as someone who needs to be hidden. People don't want to see a pain they can't name. They fear what they can't explain. And rather than open their hearts, they close the doors, lock them, label you, and carry on as if you never existed. That night, you lie in your straw bed, hand on your chest, listening to your heartbeat, and you whisper to yourself, maybe I'll be allowed to stay, as long as I stay quiet enough. On a misty morning, you overhear a story about a girl named Ellen, who used to talk to trees, not in a poetic, dreamy way. She spoke to them. I asked the tree how it felt that day, asked if the leaves were sad to fall, and asked if the roots hurt when people sat on them. Some folks said she was special. Others whispered, she's gone mad. But no one made a final judgment, because Ellen was still beautiful. And in the Middle Ages, beauty could blur the line between miracle and menace. One day they found her standing in a field, arms stretched wide, eyes closed, whispering prayers to the sun. The village elders murmured, perhaps God is speaking through her. But a priest shook his head. No, if it were God, she'd be in church. And that was the first time you saw this. A strange behavior could either be a divine sign or proof of possession in this place. And often, the only thing separating the two was the storyteller's tone. If you quietly gaze at the sky, it's soulful contemplation. If you gaze too long, you're communing with strange forces. If you cry during prayer, they nod. Strong faith. If you cry while harvesting wheat, the devil's playing with her heart. You don't know whether to laugh or cry, because laughing might be a sin, and crying could be a demonic invitation. Once, you saw a man sitting in the churchyard, mumbling scripture for hours. People said, he is being tested by the Lord. A week later, he was still there, but silent now, just staring at nothing. So they changed their story. The devil has won. Same man, same bench. Only his movements changed. And just like that, God and the devil switched places. You wonder, if I'm sad but still attend every Mass, am I seen as patiently enduring a sacred trial? But if you miss one service due to sheer exhaustion, she's slipping from faith. You recall feeling lost in thought when you simply wanted to sit alone by the well. An old woman passed by and said softly, she's listening for guidance. Then someone behind her shook their head. No. Her eyes burned like coals. Something's wrong. And you realize you're not allowed to be sad in a neutral way. Your sadness must always wear a label. It's either a holy test, requiring stoic silence like a heroic martyr, or it's the devil's mischief, requiring exorcism, smoke, salt, and shouted Latin. There's no space for someone to ask, "What do you need?" There are only two boxes, sacred or dangerous. You once saw a little boy sitting in the market corner, drawing circles in the dirt. He kept repeating a nonsense song, drawing and redrawing endlessly. His mother was worried, but the village healer said, "Perhaps a pure soul is revealing itself." By the third day, when the boy started screaming in the night, the tone shifted. Best lock his door from the outside. You think about all this as you lie beneath your thatched roof, listening to rain drum against the straw walls. Yesterday, you were pitied. Today, you are watched. Tomorrow, you may be forgotten. Because between God's challenge and the devil's game, no one ever asks how you feel. No one cares about the story you carry inside. They measure your soul by how synchronized your knot is. Purse your lips for too long, and you're suspicious again. You lie there, remembering when you spoke to Elric, the patch of moss on your stone cell wall, your only confidant. You once whispered, "If I ever said all the things I think, the village would either declare me touched by the divine or someone who should be locked up. Maybe both." On the same day, you smile. Not a kind smile, not a grim one, not joyful or sorrowful. It's just a movement of the face, a gesture, to stay alive. One thing you've learned, after being diagnosed by your bowels, your womb, the moon, and the whisper of demons, is this. In this time, no one talks about the mind. No one says, "Perhaps your mind is weary." No one asks, "Are you carrying too much right now?" Number. They only ask, "What have you done wrong?" It's never treated as emotional. Doesn't you feel something that doesn't fit the script? Waking up too heavy to move, sitting still too long in the afternoon, lying awake at night with no clear reason? It's moral. It's a spiritual fault, proof of divine imperfection. And the response? Always the same three things: judgment, prayer, and waiting for you to return. Not return to yourself. Please return to the version of you they expect. Once you said aloud that you'd been anxious all day, for no particular reason. Just a tight chest, a storm in your ribs. The person listening didn't ask anything more. They just looked at you like you'd confessed to a sin with no name. "You may have erred in thought," they said. "You need to confess before God." And so, you were ushered back into the church, knees to the cold stone floor, before a candle taller than your entire emotional range, straining to remember, did I say something unkind? Think something impure? Or maybe, I was just too sad because no one listened. The answer always leads to the same place. You are the problem. There is no stress, only lack of faith. No pressure, only lack of discipline. There is no breakdown, only insufficient repentance. One day, you overhear two women speaking. "I haven't been able to eat these past few days." "Have you confessed?" "Yes, but I still feel the same." Then you must not have been honest. No one asks, "Are you sleeping okay?" No one offers, "Would it help if I sat with you for a while?" Only the suggestion, pray deeper, kneel longer, fast for another day. Perhaps then your soul will feel light. You begin to feel like a candle burning from both ends. On one end, your emotions are bleeding slowly out. The other is the pressure to be resilient in faith. And in the middle is you, melting, diminishing, invisible. A man once came to you, fingers wrapped around a wooden rosary. He said he'd heard a voice calling to him at night. Not something frightening, just a whisper, repeating, "You are wrong." You said, "Maybe it's your conscience." He shook his head. "The heart doesn't speak. Only God and the devil do." And just like that, instead of being heard, he was led away. For 3 days of confession. When he returned, the voice was gone. Not because he was healed, but because he had learned to be silent. So did you. After repeatedly being asked, "Are you sure you're not hiding something?" you learn to nod at the right time and smile on cue. And if someone asked, "How are you today?" you'd answer, "Thanks be to God," feeling better. Even when inside you nothing had changed. You live in a world without therapy, only scripture and the doctrine of humility, where silence is a virtue and tears, if they fall, must be born of shame, not pain. And you wonder, if back then someone had simply sat beside you and said, "I don't fully understand, but I'll stay here with you." Maybe you wouldn't have had to pass through so many church doors. There are so many stone rooms. There are so many fasting nights to purify the soul. Maybe all it took was one person, just one. That night, you lie on an old straw mat, feeling each breath stretch through the dark. You no longer wait for miracles. You no longer fear devils. You only wish people in this time knew that sadness isn't a sin. It's just sadness. And sadness deserves to be heard too. Over time, you realize this. The first thing a sad person learns isn't how to overcome sadness. It's how to hide it. Hide it well. Hide it as deep as the wine cellar under a monastery. Hide it so thoroughly that even you forget what you're carrying. Not because you want to, but because the world demands it. You once tried to speak up. Gently. Something like, "Lately, my heart feels hollow." And the answer was, "You're probably not working hard enough." You tried again. "Some nights I lie awake and my heart races like it's trying to escape my own body." They nodded. "You need to pray harder. Don't let your mind wander." And that's when you realized, every time you open your mouth, you're not being heard. You're being corrected. Not to be understood, but to be adjusted. So, you begin refining your words. You learn to nod at the right time. To say, "Thanks be to God," even when your soul feels like a collapsed house. When someone asks, "How are you today?" swing. You smile faintly. Same as always. Nice breeze. Green grass. You learn to pretend to exist. Silence becomes armor. Say nothing, and you can't be wrong. Don't sigh, and you won't be suspicious. Don't react, and you won't be singled out. And bit by bit, you vanish from yourself. You work. You laugh just enough to avoid questions. You eat just enough not to be pitied. You avoid the gaze of elders because they're the ones who say, "Those eyes, they remind me of someone once possessed." You even learn not to dream. Because once you described a dream about falling into a deep well, and the next morning they brought you mugwort and 2 priests. So you stop speaking about what's in your head. You stop naming your fears. You stop hoping someone might ask, "And then what happened?" Because they won't. They'll judge. Or worse, they'll help. Once, you sat on the forest's edge, trying to breathe slowly, listening to the leaves. Someone passed by and said, "She sits alone a lot. No one knows what she's thinking. That's dangerous." After that, you started sitting inside. The door is slightly ajar. Light just enough. Expression is just normal enough. You become a master of looking fine. The sadness is still there, but you've learned how to seat it quietly, not speaking, not moving, not bothering anyone. And strangely, the more you hide it, the more you're praised. People start saying, "She's so steady. She's quiet, very mature." Just looking at her brings a sense of peace. No one knows that your steadiness was built on sleepless nights. You sit in the dark, head resting on your arm, thinking about how you live now. Not healthy, just not disruptive. And that, in this era, is a spiritual success. You remember Thomas, who used to draw strange images on his walls. No one understood them, but they were vibrant, even though he only used mud and turmeric. One day, he stopped drawing. People clapped. He's cured. No one asked why he stopped. No one noticed his eyes had lost their light. As long as he was silent, it was fine. You see yourself in him, not drawing, not speaking, not reacting, and because of that, you're allowed to stay. In this time, sadness isn't something to heal, it's something to bury. So deeply that when you finally collapse, people will say, "What happened? She seemed so cheerful yesterday." And you'll want to reply, "No, yesterday I was just quiet." But you won't say it. Because you've learned, silence is survival. Silence is invisibility. Silence means you won't become an example in Sunday's sermon. You lie down, hearing your heart thump like a distant drum. And in your mind, you whisper, "Maybe tomorrow I'll smile again." Even if inside, it still feels like an empty afternoon. Not because you feel joy, but because you have to. You can learn to be silent. You can learn to sit with a straight back, nod at the right moments, smile politely, and say all the acceptable things like, "Thanks be to God, I'm well." But sadness doesn't learn to go away. It only learns to wait. It doesn't scream. It doesn't confuse you. It just flows, like groundwater, quiet, steady, day after day, beneath the villages, busy sowing seeds, harvesting crops, and chatting about the coming winter. You live like a house built on that hidden stream, sturdy on the outside, hollowing on the inside. Every day you wake up, splash your face with cold well water and hope to feel something. But you don't. Only habit remains. You speak to your neighbors with just enough warmth. You reply politely to the elders. You nod when someone talks about faith, sin, or forgiveness. But you don't believe anymore. Not because you wanted to lose faith, but because you're tired. Tired of pretending to be fine for so long, you can't even remember what not being fine truly feels like. Are you tired of your sadness being treated as a moral failure, not a voice begging to be heard? And you start to see it, not just in yourself. One day, you pass the carpenter's house. He's always been quiet, always focused, always calm. But today, he stands alone, staring blankly, still holding his plane, unmoving. You stop. Say nothing. Because you know, sometimes silent presence is the only way to say, "I see you." A young woman in the village stops coming outside. They say her husband must have gone away. But you know, some sadness has nothing to do with anyone else. It's born from within. It grows in silence, and it blooms in rooms filled only with wind and wandering thoughts. They say your village is peaceful, but you know, it's the peace of swallowed cries. Everyone is quiet, but quiet because they can't speak, not because they have nothing to say. Quiet out of fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of being locked away. Fear of becoming the next example in Sunday's sermon. You remember a time during Mass when the priest spoke of someone consumed by darkness due to pride and refusal to confess. He didn't say a name. He didn't have to. You knew he meant the man who once painted the walls in the square, who once smiled gently at children, and who one day simply vanished. No farewell, only whispers. You think about yourself, about how you vanished too, at least from the inside. And you wonder, if one day you truly shattered, who would pick up the pieces? Maybe no one. Here, people don't pick up broken things. They bury them, like underground water. No one digs it up. No one directs its flow. But everyone knows. It's there. Soaking the walls, softening the soil. Sometimes collapsing an entire house before anyone understands why. You sigh. Not to be noticed. Just a thin stream of cold breath. Because you feel yourself living in a world where sadness must wear an invisible cloak. It must be silent, polite, and well-behaved. And if it spills out, like a flood breaking its banks, people won't ask, "Are you okay?" They'll whisper, "She's broken." Sadness must be hidden. Weariness must wear a smile. Tears, those are best saved for God. You've learned all the survival rules, but sometimes the body stops listening. And then one day you collapse. Not in some dramatic scene in the market with cries and gasps. No, You simply sit down by the side of the road, head bowed, hands trembling. You can't stand up. You can't answer anyone. Your eyes are open, but they no longer focus on anything. An older woman passes by. She stops. She doesn't come close. She just looks at you and slowly makes the sign of the cross. Very slowly, very carefully, as if you were no longer entirely human. You don't cry, you don't speak. You just sit there waiting for a hand, for a question, for someone to say, "Are you all right?" But no one asks. People walk around you. They change direction. They avoid your gaze like they're afraid to look too closely at themselves. And you understand. Sadness is forgivable, as long as it's silent. But public sadness? That's dangerous. Because it is time. People believe that the mind can be contagious. Not like a virus, but like a spirit. Sit too close to sorrow, and it will take root in you too. They don't think you need help. They think you're a crack in the wall, a weakness that could spread across the village, rot the beams, and bring down the house. A man whispers, "My brother-in-law used to sit just like that." Then one night, he started laughing in the dark. A woman answers, "They say if you look someone like that in the eye, you won't sleep for 3 nights. You hear it all. No one looks at you when they speak, but they talk loud enough so you'll hear. You've become a story." From that day, everything changes. Children are told not to go near you. Someone quietly ties laurel leaves to your gate to ward off dark spirits. Bread is left on your doorstep, but no one knocks. They don't want you to starve, but they also don't want to meet your eyes. You become a living legend, like the old apple tree behind the church that once got struck by lightning. No one dares to cut it down because there's something strange about it. You start counting the people who've stopped talking to you. The kind neighbor, the egg seller who used to ask about the weather. They all slide out of your life like rain off a thatched roof. No sound, no goodbye. You're not angry, just cold. And then, one day, someone comes. A young priest, kind eyes, soft voice. He doesn't ask anything deep. He doesn't quote scripture. He just hands you a warm roasted potato and says, "I don't know what you're feeling, but I'll sit with you for a while." That's it. No diagnosis, no prayer, no blaming your womb or the moon or the autumn wind. And for the first time in many days, you feel that something inside you hasn't been lost. When the priest stands to leave, you don't say thank you, but your eyes are wet, not from emotion, but because at last, someone sat beside you without flinching. You stay in the same spot, but this time, your head isn't bowed. You look down the road, not waiting for a miracle, not demanding answers, just being. And in this time, that, in itself, is a radical act. You thought you'd learned how to survive in silence. But it turns out that even instinct, something as fragile as a thread dancing in the breeze, can be treated like a sin. One day you casually say, "Feels like it might rain tonight." The sky is still clear. There are no clouds yet, but you can smell the shift in the air. That rich, damp scent only those who've spent years under open skies would recognize. That night, it rains. But instead of praising your sensitivity to nature, people look at you like you summoned the storm. An older woman tugs her son's sleeve and whispers, "She knew. Might be a witch." You almost laugh, but then you remember. The woman from the next village once sensed a storm coming, and months later, she was accused of having unnaturally sharp senses. They called it the demon's sight, the ability to perceive what should remain hidden. So, you go quiet. No more weather predictions. Then, another time, you dream of a barn catching fire. The dream is vivid. You wake up with the smell of smoke still clinging to your nose. You tell a close friend, just in passing. And 3 days later, the barn burns down. Someone knocked over an oil lamp. Your friend says nothing. But the next morning, A cross drawn in ash appears on your door. A quiet way of saying, "We know." You want to protest? It was just a coincidence. But here, no one believes in coincidence, only omens. And omens must be extinguished. After that, every time you feel a vague sense of something, the wind hitting your skin just so, the air suddenly growing thick, you swallow the words. Because here, being too sensitive doesn't make you perceptive. It makes you someone who sees what shouldn't be seen. You once saw a little girl who liked to sit by the stream and listen to the water. One day she said, "The water sounds sad today. Maybe something bad is coming." A week later, the village was struck by illness. Since then, no one has let her near the stream. They don't accept poetic coincidence. They're afraid. Afraid of what they can't explain. Afraid of intuition, that wild, unmeasurable thing. Even goosebumps, a sensation everyone feels, are suspect. If you say, "I suddenly felt a chill," they'll ask, "Is something following you?" If you say, "My heart's racing for no reason," they'll whisper, "Something must be passing through." And you, just a person with a delicate sense of the world, becomes someone to be watched. One feeling, at the wrong time, can redefine your entire identity. You no longer trust your instincts. You start to second-guess your natural reactions. 3 sneezes? Say nothing. A dream of floodwaters? Please keep it to yourself. Since someone's sadness, don't dare mention it, or they'll accuse you of feeling too much for your good. In this age, feelings aren't praised. They're feared. No one says, "You're attuned." They say, "You hear things you shouldn't." You lie on straws, listening to rain tap against the thatch. In your chest, you feel something again. Not quite a thought, not quite a fear, just a tightening, a breath that misses its rhythm. You close your eyes and swallow the feeling deep. Not because you reject it, but because you have to survive. You thought you were just a little overwhelmed, a little heavy-hearted, a little powerless at the end of a long day. But you're not allowed to feel a little anything in this world. Here, emotion, even as light as a breeze, is seen as a dangerous ripple on the surface of moral stillness. You're not allowed to be sad for too long, not allowed to be too joyful too quickly. You are not allowed to be anxious unless you cite a reason written in holy ink and stamped by the church. You're only allowed to feel just enough, enough to blend in, not more, not less. A single sigh too long, and someone tilts their head. What's going on in that mind of theirs? A gaze that lingers too far, a face that droops at the wrong hour. And suddenly, you're being called in for a sermon. Once, you cried over a dead chicken. Not because you were soft, but because it was a chicken you raised from a hatchling. You'd held it close on cold nights and fed it water from your fingertips. When a fox killed it, you mourned for 3 days, skipping dinner, staying silent in the harvest hours. No one said anything to your face. But behind your back, the whispers crawled. Who gets so emotional over a chicken? That's odd. So you stopped crying. Not for chickens, not for cats, not even for people. You learned to swallow your tears like bitter medicine, not to heal, but to keep your place in the village. You weren't allowed to feel too much. Those who did were seen as weak, then unstable, then showing signs. You once confided in a friend, "Maybe I'm not sad because of anyone. Maybe it's just something inside me that wants to cry." She nodded, but went quiet. The next day, her eyes looked at you differently, as if you had confessed something you never should have said, as if every smile from now on would be dissected. Is she really happy, or just pretending? So you stopped. You said nothing more. You began watching others, people pretending, just like you. The man who laughed the loudest at the festival was the one who sat silently by the fields. The girl who sang while gathering firewood was the one who stared at the moon as if she might dissolve into it. Everyone was holding something in. Everyone was hiding. Because everyone knew. Emotions are double-edged knives. Grip them wrong, and you'll bleed. You stopped sharing your dreams. Even the one where you became a bird flying over the village, watching everyone wearing masks, no one speaking, but all of them silently crying. You woke with your heart racing, covered in sweat, but told no one. Because a dream like that would be labeled madness, or worse, divine punishment for lacking faith. Dream of fire? You'd be warned you might bring disaster. Dream of blood? It's a bad omen. It's better not to dream at all. Or if you must, forget immediately. Gradually, you stopped noticing your emotions altogether. Not because you didn't have them, but because they were useless in this world. If you're happy, smile only moderately. If you're sad, hide it. If you're worried, turn it into action. If you're angry, bury it deep, or risk being called unstable. You became a vessel, glazed, smooth. No cracks, no sharp edges, but inside, hollowing. People began to praise you. Calm, composed, sensible. But you knew, they complimented a version of you sanded down until no single edge remained. And emotion, true emotion, is what gives a person shape. Without it, you begin to lose your form. Staring at your reflection in a puddle, you're no longer sure who you are. You respond how you're expected. Speak how you've been taught. Nod with the right rhythm at the right rituals. But something within you, the part that is truly you, has stepped to the side. Not angry, not bitter. Just withdrawn. And then you realize, no one took your emotions away. You were forced to abandon them. Because keeping them served no purpose. No one listened. No one believed. No one wanted to see it. You finally understood why some people in the village talk to themselves. They aren't mad. They're trying to keep something inside them from rotting. Saying it aloud, even if no one answers, is better than letting it suffocate in your chest. That night, you lie down and listen to your heart. A small drum beating quietly in the dark. You don't feel pain. You don't feel sorrow. You don't feel anything. Just emptiness. A hollow shaped like a person. Still working. Still smiling. Still breathing. But empty. There's something you don't notice right away. It comes slowly, like rain dripping onto an old roof. At first, it's just a vague feeling. Then, it becomes familiar. Then, it becomes real. You no longer know what you're feeling. When no one ever asks, "Are you okay?" You stop asking yourself that too. When every answer you've heard is, "Don't be sad. Be strong. Just pray and it'll pass." You stop trying to name the thing inside your chest. You live each day like a person piloting a machine called yourself. You attach your face in the morning. Fasten on a smile at lunch. Nod on schedule in the evening. Everything functions on cue. But something inside you, the part that's supposed to feel warmth, joy, fear, trembling, isn't present. It's not dead, but it no longer responds. You used to have emotions like a thread, thin, fragile, but endless, tying you to your memories, your dreams, the soft, messy version of yourself. Now, the thread is gone. Not cut, but rotted. It's ripped from too many false nods. From too many "I'm fine"s said just to survive. From not giving it light, or water, or air, for far too long. And so you begin to feel like a stranger to yourself. When you smile, you're unsure if it's real or an act. When your heart beats fast, you don't know if it's excitement or fear. When you pause in awe of something beautiful, a field bathed in purple light at dusk, a breeze brushing your sleeve, you're unsure what to feel. Unsure if you can still feel it at all. You feel like a stranger living in a familiar body. People still recognize you. Still say hello. Still say, "You seem more stable now." But you know, They're speaking to your shell. The part inside, the part that once knew how to love, how to rage, how to fear, how to care, has gone silent, like soil left untouched after a half-plowed season. You used to think, even if no one understands me, at least I still understand myself. But now, you're not so sure. When you cry, you don't know why. When you can't sleep, you don't know what's stirring. When someone says something kind, you feel confused, as if they're speaking to someone else behind you. You used to have a name. Now you're just someone like everyone else. A shape, a greeting, a problem-free silhouette. And the saddest part? No one notices you're gone. Because to them, the important thing isn't how alive you feel. It's that you still know your role. You don't disrupt. You don't speak up. You don't rebel. You're not depressed enough to be locked away. You're not strangely excited enough to be called a problem. You live in the in-between. Just quiet enough to avoid exile. Just dim enough to stay out of focus. And you wonder, if you keep going like this, will you one day disappear entirely? Not by dying, but by fading. Like ink soaked through wet paper. Like a song in the wind, slowly buried in dust. You lie on the straw mat, eyes closed. You picture yourself as the child you once were, who cried when it hurt, hugged when lonely, called out when afraid. And now, all you do is stay silent. You're not sure if you still exist. But someone in the village might say, "They're still here. I saw them wave yesterday." Yes, you still wave, but you're no longer there. One day you realize that you're no longer in pain, not sad, not afraid. And instead of relief, what you feel is emptiness. A long silence with no beginning and no end. Someone has pulled every string from the instrument inside your chest. No sound, no response, no resonance. You try to remember the last time you were truly happy. Maybe it was that night by the fire with a few workers when someone told a joke you didn't fully understand, but you laughed anyway, because laughter spreads like fire through a dry straw. Or maybe it was that early morning when you saw a small cat yawning on the coop's roof. But now, when you recall those moments, your heart doesn't beat faster. Your eyes don't brighten. You just remember. Like remembering the name of a dish you once tasted, but can no longer recall its flavor. You begin to wonder, have I become so numb? I'm no longer fully human. You still move. You still speak. You still nod when someone greets you. You still bake bread, wash your hands, and even hum briefly when the wind is gentle. But nothing reaches you anymore. Everything passes through like mist. There and gone, leaving no trace. The most terrifying thing isn't the pain. It's when pain has been dulled so long, it can no longer scream. All that's left is a silent void. It doesn't stab. It doesn't wake you in tears. It just leaves you there, quietly staring at the dim light slipping through the thatched roof, thinking, am I still here? You don't know who to tell. Because who would understand the terror of feeling nothing? Who would believe that what scares you isn't a scream, but the total absence of any sound inside? You tap your chest, gently at first, then harder. Not to hurt yourself, but to see if anything responds. Nothing. Only the hollow thump of old bone. You press your lips together. Exhale deeply. Not to relax, but because you need to hear some sound that still belongs to you. And then you remember the early days, when sadness still had heat, when your tears carried warmth as they rolled down, when your inner voice still beats like a drum, even if it was a storm drum, even if it hurt. At least it was real. Now you only have numbness. Everything around you continues. The rice still grows, the wind still blows. Villagers still gather at the well, tell stories, and laugh at things you no longer care enough to hear. You sit among the living and realize you are not one of them. One afternoon, the village holds a rain ritual. Everyone dresses a little nicer, holding laurel leaves, murmuring the old chant. You stand among them, but your mind is blank. Your hands are cold. Your eyes skim the crowd like watching a play you no longer have a role in. And in that moment, you feel it most clearly. You are drifting. So lightly that if someone waved to call you back, you wouldn't be sure you could even turn around. You don't know if this is the end or just a phase. All you know is you can't return to yourself because you no longer know who that is. And the strange part is, everyone thinks you're fine. No one checks in because you no longer cry. No one worries because you're no longer frantic. No one looks too closely because you've mastered the soft smile that answers, "How are you today?" with a wind-thin shrug. In a society with no language for quiet pain, emotional paralysis goes unseen. Because it makes no noise, it doesn't smoke, it doesn't collapse in the marketplace. It only causes you to disappear, bit by bit, each day. One morning, you see your reflection in a basin. Your eyes are not dull. Your face isn't pale. But you don't recognize that gaze. It belongs to someone who once lived inside you, but has left. Without a goodbye, without a trace. And so you begin to fear, not death, but staying alive with no one inside to keep living. You fear waking up with nothing to wake up for. You fear pretending, not because someone makes you, but because you have no other way. You want to scream, not to be rescued, but to prove to yourself that you still have a voice. You don't scream, but you begin to write. Tiny, crooked words. On cloth scraps, on the barn wall, on wooden boards. No one reads them. But you're not writing for anyone. You're writing for the part inside, the part you're afraid you've lost. If you're lucky, there will come a day when someone quietly sits beside you. They don't ask, "What's wrong?" They don't say, "Be strong." They don't tell cheerful stories to distract you from your emptiness. They just sit, as if their presence is something soft, warm, real, and needs no explanation. That day, you're sitting on the porch, eyes cast downward, fingers tracing a crack in the faded brick floor. You're not thinking, not trying to look busy. You're just there, like a stubborn shadow clinging to existence because you haven't yet found a reason to disappear. And then, footsteps. Unhurried, unnervous. That person, someone you were never close with, someone who used only to offer a passing greeting, walks up and sits down next to you, not in front of you, not face to face, just beside you, close enough for you to hear their breathing, close enough to remind you that you're not a lone tree in an empty field. You glance over. Just a second. They don't look back. They're looking elsewhere as if to say, "I'm not here to examine you. I'm here to exist with you." No words, no icebreakers, no advice. But something shifts. A barely audible crack inside your chest. Not the sound of breaking, but of thawing. You don't have to explain. You don't have to recount the long journey of empty days and unnamed ache. You don't need to mention the hollow confusion of not knowing who you are anymore. Because they don't need the details. They just need to sit. And somehow, that makes you feel seen. A gentle wind blows. You pull your arms in slightly against the chill. The person beside you doesn't offer a blanket. They don't ask, "Are you cold?" They just shift slightly closer. That's all. Not too intimate. Not too distant. As if to say, "If you're cold, I can't warm you, but I can be near." And in that moment you realize you're not invisible. That simple thing, a presence that expects no reaction, demands no improvement, has no agenda, becomes the rarest gift you've known in a long time. You don't have to get better to be worth caring about. You don't have to cheer up to make others comfortable. You can remain exactly as you are, blurred, quiet, uncertain, and still deserve to have someone stay. For the first time in many days, your chest rises not out of obligation, but from a breath that wants to happen. a breath, with a witness. The person doesn't stay long. They sit for a while, then quietly rise as gently as they arrive. No pat on the back, no farewell message, no promises. But even after they've gone, you still feel a little warmth beside you, as if their presence, though no longer visible, lingers. You don't feel healed, you don't feel better, but you feel something strange. You want to live another day, not for any specific reason, just to see if maybe someday someone else might sit beside you too. Or perhaps you'll grow steady enough to sit beside someone else. You start to wonder, maybe salvation doesn't come from prayer, doesn't arrive through priests or physicians. Maybe sometimes it's just someone who doesn't leave. Someone who stays, even without understanding. Who's willing to sit in silence, in empathy, in the simple, unexhausted kindness of being human. Since that day, you find yourself sitting on the porch more often, not to wait for anyone, but to be present. And one day, a young boy, one who usually keeps his head down when passing your house, stops. He doesn't speak, he doesn't sit, but his eyes linger on you a little longer than usual, and you nod, very gently, as if to say, I'm not asking, I'm not expecting, but I see you. Not everyone gets someone to sit beside them. Not everyone meets someone patient enough to simply be there, without demanding you to be okay immediately. Most of the time, when you begin sinking into the dark corners of your mind, you're alone. Not because people are cruel, but because they're afraid. Afraid your silence might awaken something in them. Afraid they won't know what to say if they sit with you. Afraid you won't get back up, they're not strong enough to lift you. So they walk around you, gently, politely, quietly, but still, they avoid it. And you, who only wanted one long, unflinching gaze, begin to shrink. Like the curled arms of a hedgehog in winter, you fold inward. Wrapped tight in thorns, even you find heavy. Because no one knocks, you stop waiting. Because no one approaches, you learn to make yourself smaller, quieter, fainter, until you nearly vanish from the painting of village life. Loneliness doesn't arrive with screaming. It comes with prolonged absence. No one asks where you've been if you disappear for a day. No one notices when you stop going to the well. No one wonders why you no longer sing, smile, or join the festivals. And at some point you stop wondering too. You sit in your little house, arms resting on your knees, watching the sunlight fall through the gaps in the wall, fading as the sun retreats. No one listens to your breath anymore. And you stop listening to it too. There are nights you wake in the middle of sleep, not from nightmares, not from noise, but simply because your body forgets why it should keep sleeping. You rise, wrap a thin shawl around yourself, step onto the porch, look into the black sky and ask, if I scream, would anyone hear? But you don't scream, because you've learned no one hears. And if the scream is loud enough, it might just earn you a label. So you begin to blend with the weeds, living just slowly and faintly enough not to draw attention. Morning, wake, work. Noon, sit by the door. Evening, gather firewood. Night, sleep early. Routines that are not wrong, but empty. You become the sole keeper of your sorrow. No one asks, no one interrupts, no one intrudes. In these times, loneliness has no name. It's not called an illness. It's called odd temperament, or just growing peculiar with age, or that's just how they are now. But you know, it's a sentence. No courtroom, no prison bars, but still a sentence. Because you're enduring a life with no witness. You look around and see people busy with harvests, weddings, and childbirth. They're occupied. They're alive. And you merely exist. You start forgetting the sound of your voice. You can't remember the last time you laughed out loud. You don't dare leave the village. Not because you're afraid of getting lost, but because you have no reason to return. One day, you catch your reflection in a water basin. That face is still yours, but there's no one inside anymore. You touch your cheek, your brow, your lips. Everything is still there. But the gaze, that spark that makes someone feel alive, has long since gone dim. You wonder, if I disappeared tomorrow, who would notice? Maybe the cat that lingers near your door would wait an extra morning. Maybe a neighbor would frown briefly when no smoke rose from your chimney. Perhaps someone would ask, "Hey, have you seen them around lately?" And someone else would reply, "Probably off somewhere." And just like that, you dissolve into the realm of the nameless. There's a bitter irony to this era. The mad are locked away. The silence is forgotten. No one sees that silence can be a cry. No one understands that some are dying slowly without ever bleeding. No one was taught that the most unbearable suffering is often the one no one sees. You lie on your straw bed, curled in your old coat, and listen to your heartbeat, soft and faint. Not because you're ill, but because no one is listening anymore, so it no longer bothers to echo loudly. That night, you don't sleep. Not because you're worried, not because you're afraid. Just empty. A kind of emptiness that no longer unsettles you, because it's become familiar. It is like living near a church bell that rings so often that you stop noticing when it tolls. You lie on the straw bed, one hand resting on your chest, the other dangling toward the cold dirt floor. The wind outside slips through the wooden slats, gentle enough not to chill you, persistent sufficient to remind you. The night is far from over. And in that stillness, a question drifts across your mind. So small, so quiet, almost just a breath. Do I deserve to be loved? Not the storybook kind of love. Not a knight and princess kind of love. Just kindness. A gaze that doesn't judge. A hand placed on your shoulder without demanding change to earn it. A listener who doesn't lace their attention with correction. You remember the times you were cared for, but only conditionally. Cared for if you smiled. Cared for if you were useful. Cared for if you were healthy, cheerful, and generous. But when you were sad? When did you go quiet? When you said, "Today I just want to sit here and do nothing." That care vanished, like fireworks fading after a festival. You don't blame them. In times like these, no one's taught that love can be for the unfinished, for the cracked, for those who don't greet mornings with cheer, who doesn't sing in spring. You live in a world where only two kinds of people are seen as worthy of love, the useful and the saintly. And you, with your unnamed fractures, your shapeless voids, your days spent lying still, not out of laziness or illness, but simply still. You've long believed you sit outside the circle of that love. You've thought about it for a long time, until tonight. When that question returns to your mind, like a flicker of flame, could I still be worthy of love, even as I am? You don't have an answer, but you feel something stir faintly in your chest, as if your heart, after so many silent days, has turned over in some distant dream, not fully awake, but not completely still either. You think about the times you've loved others, not because they were perfect, but because they were real. The man who forgot names but always shared his bread. The woman who lost track of stories but always knew how to hold someone crying. You loved those fragmented humans, not despite their flaws, but because they didn't try to hide them. So maybe, just maybe you too could be loved like that. You turn your face toward the dark. Your eyes remain open. No grand hope. No yearning for some miraculous redemption. But perhaps just the possibility that someone, somewhere, won't need to understand you fully, won't need to fix you. They'll simply choose not to walk away, and that would be enough. You don't know if that could happen in this village, in this time, but you hold that question like a small stone tucked into your pocket, unseen, unspoken, but always there. Something that keeps you from giving up completely, that keeps your hand from letting go entirely. The night continues. long and quiet. But this time, the quiet isn't completely hollow. Within it, a new breath stirs. Software, like someone's hand resting on your shoulder. Not to push, not to anchor, but simply to say, wordlessly, I see you. Still. A gray morning. After days of silence, you decide to try. Not to scream in the market, not to cry in front of strangers. Just one sentence, soft as mist, murmured while flipping a flatbread over the fire, your eyes fixed on the glowing coals. I just wish someone could still love me, even before I'm better. The person next to you, an acquaintance, not close, pauses for just a moment, then exhales, not sharply, but not gently either. Don't ask for too much, they say. Everyone has their burdens. You can't expect someone to carry your sadness when they're still trying to live. You nod, even though your heart does not. You flip another piece of bread, as if the words did nothing to you. But they did. They blew out the tiny flame you had quietly kindled inside yourself the night before. You're not angry with them. In times like this, everyone is taught that love is a reward, not something natural. To deserve love, you must be strong, well-behaved, resilient. That if you are hurting, the first thing you should do is stay quiet. Because if you speak, if you say you want to be loved even while you're breaking, you'll be seen as demanding, as dragging others into your sadness, as weak and selfish, as not thinking of others. You once heard someone say, people like her, always gloomy, who'd want to be around that? It's exhausting just standing near her. And you understood. Here, sorrow is treated like a contagious illness, and instead of being healed, the sick are avoided. You once tried writing a few lines to an old friend. Just a few words. I miss the days when we could sit in silence together. You weren't asking them to come back. You didn't need an explanation. It was just a small gesture of the heart. But they never replied. And you understood. Some people only stay when you still have sunshine to warm them. You began to believe, wanting to be loved while in pain was a kind of sin. The sin of not being strong enough before reaching out for help. The sin of asking for a hand before you fixed yourself. And so you go quiet again. This time, not out of fear, but out of shame. You're ashamed for ever thinking you had the right to need someone when you were not your most lovable self. You return to the old bed, the damp kitchen, the quiet gaze, and you become someone who knows how to nod, how to say thank you, how to smile just enough. But at night, when no one else is awake, you whisper to your shadow on the wall, I'm sorry for wanting what I shouldn't have wanted. You begin performing again, even better than before. You smile at the right moments, say the right thanks, and show enough concern. You make others feel reassured, because you've stopped asking. But inside, you are no longer at peace, because now you know you are only loved when you don't need to be. And you ask yourself, then, is that love even real? You look out the window at the ash tree, standing still in the wind. It doesn't bloom this season. Its leaves are faded, but no one blames it. No one says, it's unpleasant to look at. No one calls it selfish for not being beautiful. You think, I wish I could be a tree, not expected to shine all year, not required to be cheerful every morning, just allowed to be, and accepted, even while shedding leaves. But you are human, and here, to be human is to be useful, to offer something soothing, light, beautiful. And if you're in pain, suffer quietly. Return only once you're healed. Love others before daring to ask for love. You close your eyes, feeling your heartbeat in your chest. Not loud, not soft, just continuing. And you whisper, not sure if to God or just to yourself, if I'm only loved when I'm okay. Is that love real? You don't tell anyone, but every night, as you lie on that old bed of straw and listen to the wind whistling through the cracks in the wall, you begin to dream. Not symbolic dreams, not terrifying nightmares, just a soft dream of a place far away that you've never seen, yet somehow you know it's real. A place where no one asks, "What did you accomplish today?" Or, "Have you prayed enough yet?" A place without judgmental eyes when you don't smile, without whispers when you sit still for too long. A place where, if you say, "I'm tired, I don't understand myself anymore," someone simply nods and replies, "I've felt that way too." And then, they don't tell you to get better. They just stay, under a tree, by a well, or in a warm kitchen. They stay, not out of duty, not from pity, but simply because people deserve to be with each other. You dream of that village, where no one asks, "Are you okay?" Just to hear the polite answer, "I'm fine." There, if you say, "I didn't do anything today," someone replies, "That's okay, me too." Sometimes, surviving is enough. If you say, "I feel empty," they don't answer. Maybe you should stay busy. They ask, "Would you like me to sit with you?" You dream of hands that don't try to pull you up, but simply hold yours while you sit. Of hugs that aren't too tight to suffocate, and not too loose to feel cold. Of laughter that isn't forced, and tears that don't need hiding. And strangely, even though it's only a dream, you find yourself breathing more evenly. Your heart no longer races or feels adrift. It simply beats, a rhythm of existence that's not demanded, not measured, just allowed. You begin to look forward to sleep, not to escape, but to return. To that place where you don't need to be strong, hide your tears, or seem better, just to keep a friendship or avoid scaring someone off. Slowly you realize you're not just dreaming of this place. You miss it, even if you've never been. As if it's a memory of the soul, a place you were meant to be born into. Not this world, where every feeling must be justified, and sorrow must be wrapped in cloth and hidden beneath the bed. One early morning, you sit by the door, looking into the soft mist. You're not thinking about chores. You're only thinking, "I wish that place were real." And then another thought drifts in, light as the season's first breeze. Or, what if I could begin to create it, even just a little? Maybe by not judging strangers when they're sad. Maybe by not asking, "Why aren't you better yet?" but instead saying, "Would you like me to sit here for a while?" Maybe by not rushing to fix someone who's lost, just walking quietly beside them for a while. You don't know if you're strong enough to build a world like the one in your dream, but you start to believe. Every time someone feels truly seen, without needing to be strong in exchange, that place comes closer. Not perfect, not complete, but real. You close your eyes and picture yourself stepping into a small room in that dream village. There's the smell of toasted bread, the crackle of firewood. Someone is sewing. They don't look at you, but they know you're there. You sit down, say nothing, and no one expects you to. You smile, not because you're happy, but because, at that moment, you don't need a reason to smile. You wake up in the early morning, just as the light slips through the wooden slats and falls across the earthen wall. You're still wrapped in that thick, worn coat, the familiar musty smell clinging to it. Outside, a rooster crows. Someone laughs while hauling up water from the well. Footsteps squish through damp grass. Everything is normal. And then you realize, the place you dreamed of last night, the warm room, the gentle hand, the wordless presence, isn't here. Here, no one speaks of sadness unless it's loud and visible. If you don't scream, don't bang your head against a wall, don't collapse on the ground, people assume you're fine. Here, tears must come with a valid reason. Death, famine, ruined crops. But if you cry simply because you feel empty, no one understands. Here, Silence isn't a cry for help. It's proof that you've learned to behave. You sit up, brushing bits of straw from your sleeve. Every movement is slow, as if your body is waiting for a clear command to do something useful. But no command comes. Only a quiet ache. I'm still here, but I'm not allowed to say so. You step outside, walking along the narrow village road. People go on as always, nods. There was small talk about crops, a hen just laid, and onions went bad from too much rain. But no one says, "How are you feeling today, truly, inside?" No one asks, "Did you sleep well? Were you afraid of something without a name?" No one was taught to ask. No one was given words for the shadows in a soul. And you realize, the language here isn't enough. Not enough to say, "I feel like I'm floating through a place with no name." Not enough to say, "I miss a version of myself I don't recognize anymore." And when there are no words, you are forced to go silent. You can't keep a journal. Paper costs more than a meal. You can't confess it to the priest. He'll tell you to fast and pray more, not to be heard. So you bury everything inside, a layer deeper each day, like hiding a cracked pot beneath the floor. No one sees it, but you know it's there. And you can smell the dampness rising from it every night. You pass an older woman, eyes clouded, back bent. She's always been called strange for talking to the wind. But you see her sitting in her garden, murmuring things no one can make out. And you think, maybe she once dreamed of that place too. A place where sadness could be spoken, not to apologize for it, just to give it shape, give it a name. You keep walking. The sun climbs higher. You move like someone with somewhere important to be, even though you don't. But in a world without words for sorrow, pretending to be busy is a way to survive. It's like writing a long letter without letters. Just movement. So people won't ask questions. Once you tried saying, "Lately I feel like I'm not myself." The other person smiled, not unkindly, just lost. They said, "Must be the weather." And you nodded, like always. You turned away, your heart whispering, "It's not their fault. They don't have the words to understand me." And then you wondered, if the pain has no words, does that mean it isn't real? But you know it is. It lives inside you like a silent fish in a still pond. No splashing, no leaping, just a quiet swim. And you sit by the shore, eyes not looking down, but your heart always knowing it's still there. You don't blame anyone, and you're not as sad as you once were. But every night you still wish someone knew how to ask, "Is there something you'd like to say, even if I won't understand it all?" That's all. There is no need for analysis, no fixing, just permission, from language, to exist while still incomplete. You return home as the evening settles in. The fire hasn't been lit. The room is dim. You sit down, staring at your shadow cast on the wall. It's faint, but it's there. And you whisper as if writing with your lips into the air, "If one day someone understands what cannot be said, I will start again from the beginning." You didn't disappear in a storm. There was no scream. No one ran into the fields calling your name in the dark. You didn't collapse by the village well. You didn't leave a farewell letter written in red ink. There was no grand event. You just faded. Faded little by little, like ink bleeding across rain-soaked paper. No one noticed the moment it began. No one marked when it ended. You were still there, still greeting people in the morning, still wiping your hands on your apron, still nodding when someone talked about the harvest, even though you no longer felt the seasons at all. And everyone was pleased, because you didn't cause trouble, because you were stable, because you didn't complain, because you had learned to be silent. You became a predictable shadow, a simple answer, a steady breath that didn't disturb anyone, and they assumed that was good enough. You began to forget the things that once made you happy, not because you lost your memory, but because the feelings attached to them had long floated away, like a towel left out after the rainy season, still hanging but no longer carrying its scent. You didn't feel sadness. Sadness is a feeling, and you had so few left to name. All you knew was, each morning, when you opened your eyes, you assembled yourself piece by piece, like a puppet trained to perform. Movements smooth, expression correct. But if anyone looked closely, they'd see no one pulling the strings anymore. Once, you saw a child scribbling in the dirt. A strange figure. Wide eyes, no lips. You asked, "Who is that?" The child replied, "Someone who isn't here anymore." And you didn't know why your chest tightened. Perhaps the child meant nothing deep, but it felt like they had just spoken your true name. Someone still present, but no longer truly here. You passed the meadow at dusk, where sunlight scattered over drooping stalks of dry grain. Everything was still. No one spoke, no one needed to. And you thought, this might be my final part, not an ending. It's just the last faded line in a worn-out draft. You recalled all the times you had tried to call for help, with words, with looks, with long silences, with repeating dreams, with sudden confessions over dinner. But each time, you were either ignored or told to try harder. Eventually, you stopped calling. Not because you were okay, but because you stopped believing anyone was listening. And that's when you began to fade. No more resisting, no more clinging, no more wishing for clarity. You accepted your place. A blurry background figure in the village painting, while all the vibrant, defined characters stood in front. You didn't blame anyone. You just slipped away from yourself. You used to be full of color. You loved the sound of running water, the night breeze. You used to laugh hard at small things. But now, everything had been pulled into gray. No more green of hope, no more red of rage, no more golden warmth of affection. Only gray, pale gray. Like ash, like clouds that won't rain. And you knew, if one day you were gone, there'd be no funeral, no memorial. No one would write your story. No one would say, "What a pity, such a gentle soul." They would simply say, "Huh. Didn't they live here for a long time?" You sat alone in the dark one last time that day and thought, not everyone dies from illness, poverty, or punishment. Some people die simply because no one has said their name in a very long time. You aren't dead. You just are no longer remembered as someone alive. You didn't vanish in a stormy afternoon. There was no scream, no torn cloak left by the stream. No final teardrop fell onto the dry earth. You didn't go anywhere. You were still there, still living in the old house with its dying hearth. Still waking early, chopping wood, hauling water, greeting villagers as they passed the gate. Everything stayed the same. Except you weren't. Not because something big happened, but because nothing happened for far too long. No one cast you out. No one hated you. No whips, no fire. Just no one called your name anymore. No one asked, "How are you today?" No one remembered you when counting heads at supper or wondering who hadn't shown up at Mass. You slowly slipped from their memory, like an object not thrown away, never used again. You began to dissolve. It's not like smoke, like a painting gone damp. The colors bled a little each day. The lines faded. The outline between you and the world disappeared. You were still a human shape, just without definition. You remember once talking for hours about the things you loved. The honeysuckle is growing by the stream, the low howl of cats before a storm, the lullaby your mother hummed while stirring porridge. But lately, you stopped mentioning those things, not because they ceased to exist, but because you stopped believing anyone wanted to hear. You didn't keep a diary. No one in this village does. But if you did, you'd probably write, "Today, I felt nothing." Then tomorrow, still nothing. And the day after, same. Not sadness, not joy, not emptiness. Just nothing. Something that sits between all feelings, but belongs to none. A gray space where everything inside you used to be sound. but is now just a fading echo. You sat in the house, watching light slip through a crack in the wall, forming pale stripes across the dirt floor. Everything was quiet, and in that silence, you began to forget who you were. Not in memory, but in sensation. Your sense of self stopped answering back. You were no longer sure. Have you ever been someone who laughed loudly, who dangled bare feet in the river, who flared up when someone said something cruel? You couldn't remember the last time you cried. Not because you stopped hurting, but because you no longer reacted, like trees that don't sway in the wind. Not because the wind isn't strong, but because the branches have dried out. Once you passed a group gossiping about a petty theft in the next village. Someone joked, "Can't be them, we're not even sure they're still breathing." They all laughed, and you smiled, not because it was funny, but because you'd grown used to performing a little so others wouldn't feel awkward. Just a bit of acting. A nod. A soft, A timely step. A silence that didn't disturb. A version of you neat enough for people to feel comfortable, but never seen sufficient to know truly. You started feeling like background. Someone is holding the stage curtain from behind. No lines, no spotlight, but still there. Not bold enough to be remembered, not faint sufficient to disappear entirely. And you wondered, if one day you truly vanished, would anyone lose sleep over it? Maybe someone would say, "Haven't seen them around lately." And another might reply, "Probably moved away." And that would be it. No search, no sorrow, no curiosity. You didn't blame them. No one's taught how to hold on to someone who's fading. Only the loud, brilliant, or completely broken are noticed here. You chose to fade so gently that no one ever thought you needed to be held onto. Each night, as you lay down, you quietly checked if you still existed. Are my fingers cold? Are my eyes dry? Is my heart still beating? But you didn't hope for the answer, because whatever it was, you no longer knew what to do with it. You felt like a shard of porcelain sinking in water. Not broken, but slowly descending. And when it hit the bottom, no splash, no ripple. Just a disappearance too silent to notice. One morning, you saw your reflection in the old water trough. Faint, smudged, unclear. You raised a hand to touch the water, but stopped. Afraid that if the image vanished, you'd have no proof you were ever here. You sat in the yard, palm on the dirt. An ant crawled across your finger, unbothered, unaware. And you thought, maybe this is what living is, being present. Not needing anyone's acknowledgement, just feeling the earth beneath your hand. You didn't need someone to pull you from the haze. You only wished someone passing by might stop, not out of pity, not out of curiosity, just to say softly, like a breath, "I still see you here."